Going to do a couple of videos on BDSM here. This will be the first one out of the series. I don't know how many there will be total. We'll get to them all eventually. I'm going to go into a few of the reasons that I've seen, experienced, and otherwise understand as to how people came into the lifestyle, or why they wanted to explore it, or just what it was. A lot of people come to it initially. Well, I'll go from my own perspective initially. As I said before, I was in a very troubled state in my life at the point in time that I found BDSM. I actually fell in love with the images online first. The leather, the lace, the images of rope bondage. Absolutely phenomenal images. I was captivated looking at these images of men and women and just everything in general. It was just phenomenal to see the artistic nature that could be presented in such an interesting act. So I started researching it more and more, and I started looking for more and more sources of information, just different aspects to look at this from. Unfortunately, after a period of time, it was probably close to a year and a half, 2 years, of researching it through non-practicing means, I finally decided to go out one day and just see what it was in person. And one of the very first experiences I had was kind of a weird one. I was sitting around and I was looking at everybody, and I wasn't quite sure what to make and what to think of people. Everyone looked normal, per se. You wouldn't have expected any of these people to be identifiable on the street as they were walking by. However, the more time I spent looking at every individual and studying every individual, the more and more I could see the natural traits and natural interactions taking place. Then I could see the hierarchies of the individuals in the group and how they were interacting with each other on a very independent basis. There was no, at this particular get-together, there was no particular structure to it. It was just a bunch of people getting together and having coffee. But if you sat back and you watched, you could tell who was the submissive, who was the dominant, who was the kind of instigator of the group, shall we say. And you could see the different personalities and the different types of possible conflict brewing underneath the surface of everything else, which appeared totally normal. It was rather an interesting and troubling experience at the same time, and that I could understand and I could see everything simultaneously. But part of me was very taken back by how obvious it was and how obvious things weren't on the surface. So that was the first human introduction to it. I ended up going to a couple of play parties afterwards, and I ended up discovering a lot of things. Homosexuality became almost a moot point to me, almost instantaneously. I found more intelligent people and more people willing to talk to you and talk about things and give you their perspectives and their honest opinions coming out of the quote-unquote gay community. And eventually I stopped seeing people, because of this experience, as gay or straight. They just became people. And the other thing that I learned, which is going to be quite a controversial point, is that every person I came across in that community, and you can see it in day-to-day life as well, every person is bisexual to a degree. Now, people definitely tend to lean towards heterosexuality more, or same-sex relationships more. There's definitely that separation, but everyone seems to be bisexual to a degree. Like, you'll see a person and you'll go, wow, they're beautiful, but that's your instantaneous reaction, and then all of a sudden you realize they're of the same gender as you if you're heterosexual, and all of a sudden you backpedal very quickly and go, I shouldn't be having thoughts like that, and then you stop. And that experience and that perspective became quite evident in this community, especially when you were at play parties and you had people walking around half naked, or whatever. And nudity in general just became this totally washed moot point. For about the first 10-15 minutes you were there, it was like, wow, I can't believe this. And then after a while, everything just kind of whitewashed away, and people just became people, clothing became clothing, and it was just, there became a whitewash, literally. Nudity was no longer viewed as nudity. Nudity just was, clothing just was. And it was kind of amazing to see the way the mind would change and evolve. I actually this is kind of a funny statement. I find it more distracting to see a woman in a low-cut top than I do to see a woman topless. I will actually stop and look at a woman with a low-cut top and wonder what's beneath the clothing. And I'll see a nude woman at one of these play parties, and I'll look at her, and my eyes will just go right past her and keep going, as if there was nothing there. Clothing seems to be a bigger factor in the whole animalistic aspect of looking and paying attention to something. Is that wandering desire of what's actually there, which I found kind of a fascinating thing, and I wouldn't have ever realized it or seen it personally had I not had the opportunity to go and do this. Here's the funny thing, I've seen people nude, and then I've seen the same person 2 days later with a low-cut top on, and I was actually more distracted by them 2 days later and having a conversation with them than I was the day that they were totally topless and nude. I had a harder time looking them in the face and diverting that animalistic instinct to look when they were clothed. It was kind of a really, I have to admit, it was a really bizarre experience to see that one in a personal sense. Like, you're sitting there and you don't mean to do it. Like, I'm not sitting there trying to look at her fucking breasts. I've seen the damn things. Hell, I played with the damn things 2 days ago. But there's this animalistic instinct that you have that draws you to look, and it's very annoying. It's very troubling as well. And as much as it personally annoys me to say it, it's there. Now, the funny thing is, when you look at the whole perspective of everything, it's amazing to see the difference between when you're there and when you're not there, and that the way the energy and the ebb and flow of the situations change, the way your interactions with the very same people can change. All in all, I have to admit, I would never exchange my experiences in the community in that world for anything. It gave me a greater perspective and a greater appreciation of humanity. It also helped me wash away the lines of sexuality in more ways than one. One of the most interesting people I ever met was actually a pair of transgendered people. One was a girly boy, basically born a male, had breast implants, had reconstructive surgery done to the face to look more feminine, but still had male body part. The other person that I had met was born male and had gone through the entire operation process. Now, the funny thing about the person who had gone through the entire operational process is that they were born male and they were now a transgendered lesbian. That was a funny one, I had to admit. That one I was absolutely astounded at trying to understand initially. And the comment that I got back, which really skewed my perspective at that moment in time, was that they always loved women, they always loved the beauty of a woman, but they never felt comfortable in their own skin. And it took me a while initially to get my head wrapped around that, and it took probably about 4 more conversations with that person to truly begin to understand where they were coming from. It's funny, I understood initially where they were coming from, but I was still having a lot of trouble in my own mind wrapping my head around that particular concept. The other one that I met, the girly boy, was kind of a funny one. A guy who was in the transition of having a sex change. I'm not sure if he actually went all the way through, or if he was stopping because the surgery to this point has not reached the point in which it can actually be fully completed. But he was actually into other guys, or should I say she. And the perspective that you get when you're into those situations is quite enlightening, where you see that gender is no longer a simple thing, and sexual preference is no longer a simple thing, and sexuality can become so blurred so quickly that there really is no concrete evidence one way or the other as to how sexuality truly is. And when you see it, not when you talk about it, but when you see it, when you experience it, when you're there, and you actually have the opportunity to converse with people and to understand them, it can blow your mind apart in an instant if you're willing to put aside your personal beliefs and your personal pre-notions and everything else and accept them for who they are, what they are, and everything else, and then understand them and where they're coming from. Your concepts will be changed. Your personal reality can be altered in an instant, and your acceptance of individuals and people as a whole can be so dramatically altered, and you can see the flaws in society in general very quickly when you're in that sort of a situation.